7 Secrets of the Goddess by Devdutt Pattanaik. Chapter 1. Gaia's Secret. Male anxiety is outdated. Part 2. The close association of women with sexual pleasure and childbirth on one hand and death on the other is made explicit in the stories of Yama and Yami, the first living creatures in the Rig Veda. Yami, the sister, approaches Yama, the brother. He rejects her advances on moral grounds and eventually dies and finds himself trapped in the land of the dead, as he has left no offspring behind in the land of the living. Thus, the rejection of sex turns him into god of death. Yami mourns for him, turning into the goddess of the night, Yamini, as well as the mournful dark river, Yamuna. Similarly, in Polynesian mythology, Maui tries to get immortality for humanity by entering the vagina of Hain, goddess of death and the netherworld, traversing her body and leaving it by her mouth. But just when he enters, she wakes up and, realizing what Maui is trying to do, bites him with the teeth she has lining her vaginal lips. Even in Greek mythology, humanity is at the mercy of goddesses, known as graces or fates, who spun the thread that determined the quality and length of everyone's lives. This connection of death with sex, sex with pleasure, and pleasure with women resulted in men associating women with immorality, misery, and vulnerability. Rejecting women through celibacy offered physical strength. In the Bible, Samson loses his hair and his strength when he succumbs to the charms of Delilah. He regains it when he rejects her and turns to God. Rejecting women granted freedom from suffering. In Buddhism, the daughters of Mara, god of desire, are associated with decay, disease, and death. In rejecting them, Gautama Siddhartha of the Sakya clan finds freedom from suffering and comes to be known as Buddha, the enlightened one. Rejection of women even granted liberation from death. In the Tantra, we hear how semen shed into a womb creates the son, but weakens the father. However, if one is able to achieve Urdhva Retas, reverse movement of semen up the spine towards the head, one can get Siddhi, magical powers to control nature, even outsmart death. These ideas led to the rise of monastic and mystical cults that sought to either control nature or escape from it. To get celibate ascetics to marry, or at least produce children, the idea of ancestors arose in China and India, obligation to whom forces a man to have children before he renounces the world. In the Puranas, these Pitra, who hang upside down like bats in the land of the dead, goad sages like Kardam and Agastya to look for wives and father children. But getting a wife was not easy. The Puranas refer to Gandharv Viva, where women chose their lovers, alongside Asura Viva, where women were bought, Rakshas Viva, where women were abducted, and Pasachya Viva, where women were made pregnant while they slept. These stories suggest the rise of trading communities, where women became popular commodities with high demand and low supply, forcing men who did not have the qualities to attract or the wealth to buy, to turn to abduction, even rape, to secure wives. In the Bhagavad Puran, Krishna has to tame wild bulls to marry Satya, daughter of Nagnajit. In the Mahabharata, Bhishma abducts Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika in order to procure wives for his brother, Vichitravirya. They were embodiments of wealth and power, mediums to create the next generation. If pastoral society gave greater value to the stud bull while castrating the rest, if trading society started valuing the female as a commodity in great demand, then agricultural society introduced the idea of ownership. At first, both men and women owned their bodies and so traded it freely. We hear of sacred prostitutes in Levant, Near East, and Babylon, Mesopotamia, dedicated to love goddesses such as Astarte and Mitila. The prostitutes were mostly women, but included a few men who were described as effeminate or even castrated, known as catamites, who existed for the pleasure of men. One reason given for the rise of sacred prostitution is that men took over all the economic activities of society, from animal husbandry to farming to trading, leaving women with no choice but to trade their bodies for pleasure and their wombs for procreation. Prostitute became a pejorative term, as only the rich could afford the most beautiful of women. Gradually, the word was used for all women who freely chose and discarded her lovers for a price. Eventually, it came to be associated with exploitation, as women were denied ownership of their bodies. The woman's body, like the land, belonged to the father, brother, husband, and even son. She was reduced to being just the field. Man was the farmer, owner, customer, and abuser. Her child now belonged to a man, either her brother in matrilineal communities or to her husband in patrilineal communities. With fathers claiming ownership over daughters and deciding who she should marry, the practice known in Sanskrit texts as Swayamvar, where women chose their own husbands, came to an end. We find in the Bhagavad Puran Rukmini choosing to elope with Krishna rather than marrying the man Shihupal, chosen by her father and brother. Likewise, in the Mahabharata, Subhadra chooses to elope with Arjun, the man she loves, rather than marry the man chosen by her brother Balram. The Purans speak of a Prajapati Vivah, where a man approaches the girl's father for her hand in marriage on grounds of merit. A Brahma Vivah is one where the girl's father offers her hand to a worthy man with the promise of dowry. In Dev Vivah, she is payment for services rendered by a man. In Rishi Vivah, a sage is given the daughter as a charitable gift, along with a cow, source of food and fuel, and an ox, beast of burden, so that he can become a householder. In the Mahabharata, Yayati gives his daughter Mamata to a priest who passes her on to 4 kings because it has been foretold she will be the mother of 4 kings. In exchange, each king gives the priest horses. Thus, the priest is able to fulfill his promise to his teacher with the help of Yayati. No one asks what Mamata wants, but she forgives her father and retires to the forest. In Nepal, until recently, women were dedicated as dukis in temples. They had to take recourse to prostitution in order to survive. Many believed sex with dukis would cure them of many ailments. Children born to them have neither caste nor inheritance, as everything comes through the father. Similar practices have been traced to many parts of India, such as the Mahari in Orissa and Kalavant or Deoli in Goa. These women were also associated with art and entertainment, as they used song and dance to attract potential customers, and the relationship was not always sexual. The Sanskrit word Devdasi came into prominence only in the 19th century, when reform movements sought to outlaw these sacred prostitutes. Men wanted to own their wives as they owned fields to ensure the child she bore was their child and not someone else's. Kunti states in the Mahabharata that at one time women were free to go to any man they pleased. Gradually, their movements were restricted after Shvetaketu found his mother in the arms of another man and realized he may not be his father's son. Shvetaketu created the marriage laws, limiting the number of men a woman could go to, and those only with her husband's permission. The Mahabharata limits the number of men a woman can go to as 4, which is why Draupadi, who has 5, is called a whore in the gambling hall by the men of the time. Significantly, in Vedic marriage rites, a woman is given to the moon, then to Gandharv Vishwavasu, then fire, and eventually her husband, thus forfeiting her rights to have more husbands. In the Mahabharata, when Vichitravirya dies, his widows go to Vyas in order to bear sons. Though biologically the children are Vyasas, legally they belong to Vichitravirya. Thus the crop belongs to the owner of the field and not to the landless laborer who ploughed the field and sowed the seeds. Likewise, the 5 Pandavas are called children of Pandu, even though he never makes his wives pregnant. Restricting the number of men a woman had access to ensured even the remainder men of the tribe could get wives. But there was always fear of being cuckolded by the wife, and of lesser men ending up fostering the children of the dominant males. In Greek mythology, Zeus, king of Olympian gods, often seduces the wives and daughters of kings in secret. He takes the form of a swan and makes love to Leda. He takes the form of a beam of sunlight and makes love to Danae. He makes love to Alcmene by impersonating her husband Amphitryon. In Hindu mythology, Indra makes love to Ahalya by impersonating her husband Gautama. In the Ramayana, the sexual prowess of Ravana is constantly described, leading to street gossip in Ayodhya as to whether Sita was truly chaste while held captive in the Rakshasa's palace. Further, there was great fear of a woman's excessive sexual appetite. The Mahabharata tells the story of one Bhangashwana who was cursed by Indra to live half his life as a man and half his life as a woman. When asked what he preferred, he said a woman's life because the sound of mother is sweeter and because a woman has greater pleasure during sex. A similar story is found in Greek mythology, where the seer Tiresias has lived life both as a man and a woman. And when Zeus asks him who gets greater pleasure during sex, he answers woman, angering Hera, wife of Zeus, who takes away his eyesight. Fear that they would never be good enough to satisfy their wives, and that their wives would therefore find any excuse to seek another more worthy lover, led to the imposition of strict laws on fidelity. Thus rose the Hindu concept of Sati. A wife's fidelity gave her magical powers, or Sat, and made her Sati. For example, Renuka was so faithful to Jamadagni that she could collect water from the river in unbaked pots made from riverbank clay. Sita proves her fidelity by going through a trial by fire. A Sati's fidelity allegedly offered her protection from widowhood. The Purans tell the story of one Shilavati who carries her leper husband on her shoulders as he cannot walk. She satisfies all his desires. She even takes him to prostitutes. A sage is so disgusted by the husband that he declares he will die when the sun rises next. Shilavati then uses her power of chastity to prevent the sun from rising. Belief in Sati meant a widow was seen as a woman who could not prevent the death of her husband. To prove her chastity, she was encouraged to burn herself on her husband's funeral pyre, giving rise to the terrible practice of Sati and the worship of women who immolated themselves. Chapter 1. Gaia's Secret. Male Anxiety is Outdated. Part 1. Chapter 1. Gaia's Secret. Male Anxiety is Outdated. Part 3.